Thank you.
Welcome to you all. Nice to see so many of you again, in spite of the good weather and people wanting to sit in their gardens. So I'm delighted that you've got so many who are attending this afternoon. Just want a quick introduction to Marion. I'm going to read the bit that was in the newsletter so you understand who she is and what she's talking about. Marion relates the flight of the faithful. Marion relates the amazing 200 years history of her husband's family. The journey taken by the family of a Sephardi Jew, Jacob ben David, as they flew from the Spanish Inquisition. They were forced to flee from Portugal in 1497, crossed the Atlantic and Mediterranean seas to Messina in Sicily, where in order to survive, changed their name and religion to Catholic. After over 170 years as olive growers and wine producers, their lives were again changed as Mount Etna erupted, destroying everything they had. The family were forced to travel north looking for employment. After 3 years, they arrived in Protestant Bavaria, where they encountered discrimination as Catholic. They secretly returned to Judaism with dramatic repercussions for the whole family. So Marion, we're in your hands for the next while. We look forward to listening and understanding what you are giving to us. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of corrections. I just want to say, first of all, I'm also speaking about my first book, Wartime is Your Time, of which I have copies available, and a little bit about some short stories which I put onto Kindle as an ebook. So I'd like to talk about them, all three of them, if you'll forgive me for doing so.
Please do.
Interesting. So first of all, thank you very much, all of you, for zooming in. That's what you call it. And just one thing before I start on Flight of the Faithful, which is my second book. It's not actually my husband's family. It was my uncle by marriage. It was his family. Not that it really matters, but I thought you ought to know anyway. I have to say, I hope you'll forgive me for having to read mostly from my notes. There are 2 pages of them. I hope you won't fall asleep in the middle. I'll try and keep you awake if I can. So I wanted to tell you about 3 publications. I have copies to show you of Wartime is Your Time and Flight of the Faithful. And I hope later you'll be able to see them from where I'm sitting. I've also published an ebook of 4 short stories with the title, The Tangled Undergrowth of Love. All 3 are based on true themes, and each one has had a personal significance for me in different ways. I began my writing career with my wartime book, which was initially based on my master's dissertation in the 1990s. My short stories followed, and then, much more recently, Flight of the Faithful. So I'm going to start with Wartime is Your Time, which I will show you, but I can always show you again later. Let me know if you can't see it later on when we unmute. You're seeing it back to front, as far as I'm concerned. Right, okay, that's that one. Wartime is Your Time is based on testimonies from many women who had been living during World War I. I recorded the extraordinary ways they helped in the war effort, and then compared their memories to the women's magazines of the period that continue to put across the need for remaining at home and keeping the home fires burning. Also, the use of propaganda was predominant, with posters, slogans, and slanted articles, and even within romantic stories. The difference that arose were remarkable. I travelled to several places, both locally and further afield. Mostly now in their 80s and 90s, the opportunity given to these women to look back on their lives set their memories alight. I would like to tell you about 2 of the women who I found touched me with their stories. Firstly, Victoria Lydiard. She was one of the last surviving suffragettes, 89 years old when I met her. She just published her first book about the need to remove cruelty on animals by using them for food. Her latest crusade was to write to all the Anglican bishops in the country to lambast them into allowing women to become bishops as well, and this at 89. She'd been in prison and force-fed as a suffragette after throwing a stone at the window of New Scotland Yard. During the war, she ran a women's club in London to give shelter for women working there who had not been able to travel home at night. After the war, she trained to become an... Sorry, she became to become an...
Hello?
Sorry, is there a problem?
No, carry on, go on.
Sorry. Lost myself now. After the war, she trained to become an optician and worked with her husband. Secondly, Sylvia Canadine. When I met her at Victoria bus station, she was traveling to Australia to join a Girl Guide jamboree. She was 94 years old. She told me how in 1910, there was going to be a big parade at Alexandra Palace with Lord Baden-Powell in charge. And the girls from her village decided they wanted to join. So they got their mums to make their uniforms and they turned up at Alexandra Palace and joined the display. When they got to the stage where Lord Baden-Powell was standing, he was very cross and he said to them, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "We all shouted out, 'We want to become Girl Scouts,'" which became the first Girl Guide troop. That was 1910. I used the recordings that were relevant to my argument, and their discussions with me are in the archives of the Imperial War Museum. I showed you the copy of the book. I hope you can see it. If not, please let me know later. I was able to collect many photographs from the magazines. The cover of the book shows a representation of cigarette cards of the period of some of the jobs the women took over as compulsory conscription of the men took place. I would like to read 2 short extracts to you, showing the strength of propaganda used and the effect it often had. I hope you're quite happy for me to do that. So I'll do that now. Give me till I find them. 1, 2, 3. The propaganda in the magazines often went like this. "Is your best boy wearing khaki? If not, don't you think he should be? He does not think that you and your country are worth fighting for. Do you think he is worthy of you?"
1279, click on send.
Oh, jolly good. "Think it over, then ask him to join the army today." One of the women that I interviewed, Dorothy, she said she had a strong desire to help the war effort. She was only 11. "I used to sing with other children from my school in village halls at meetings with young men to volunteer. I used to sing solo. One particular evening I sang, 'Oh, we don't want to lose you, but we think you ought to go.' One young man stood up and said, 'I'll make one.' He enlisted and was killed within 1 week. I was very upset and felt responsible. I still do. I put everything into my singing." And this was a lady well into her 80s who had never forgotten. I can give you a little bit more if you're quite happy to hear. The magazines were still using propaganda as a way to get everybody involved, particularly women who they considered should still be at home and not in case their loved ones came home. And this woman wrote to her daughter, "Darling, what an inestimable privilege you have, marrying one of England's disabled heroes, devoting your life to his service. No orange blossoms or anything like that. I think it would be bad form, but a smart grey frock and hat. I am grief-stricken, but I feel I must write to tell you of Roy's splendid achievement, how he got his MC. As soon as he is strong enough, he goes to Buckingham Palace for the investiture, a great honour, and the King will personally thank him for his bravery. He is, of course, a trifle depressed, but that will wear off once he is out of hospital and has been decorated. I'm proud of his blindness and disability, and I thank God for blessing me among all women for mothering a hero." Then she gets a letter from her fiancé confirming the reality of the situation. "Dear Nell, the nurse is writing this for obvious reasons. Mother will have told you about my eyes and my leg, but there's something she hasn't told you because she doesn't know. There will never be any perambulator on that lawn of ours, Nell. You're brick enough to stand the blindness and the limp, but the other is too much to ask any woman. So I release you from your promise. I haven't cared about anything for a long time. I only wish to Christ they'd left me another 5 minutes in the trench." There's plenty more. And I thought then, having talked about this, that the recent celebrations of VE Day have brought back to me many memories of the Second World War, as I'm sure they have to many of you. I found when I wrote the book how little had changed this time round in the suffering so many of us had to undergo. Going on to the 4 short stories, 3 are very loosely based on incidents in my family, and one told to me by a friend concerning his great-aunt. Barely more than a child, she escaped a pogrom in Russia, suffered a terrible journey alone to America, but eventually married the Argentinian ambassador. There are strong echoes here in my next book of being refugees. My latest publication is Flight of the Faithful, which is here. I'll show it to you. I don't know why it's coming back to front, but you can see it properly afterwards. I was given some documents several years ago by a cousin whose ancestors had vineyards and olive groves in Sicily in the 17th century. They were Catholics whose family had been settled there for nearly 200 years. When I translated their surname, Campofiori, meaning field of flowers, I wondered how this had come about, as when they eventually settled in Bavaria, they were advised to change it from Italian into German in what was a Protestant country. Now the name became Blumenfeld, translated again from Field of Flowers. As their descendants are Jewish, I felt there might be earlier members with the same religious background. Looking behind the documents, I began the book in the year 1492 with the coming of the Spanish Inquisition. At this time, I gave the family the name Ben David. Now a fiercely Catholic country, other religions were given the choice of becoming conversos or leaving. Many died under these rules. Perhaps some of you recollect or recognize this background as your own. The family chose to flee from Toledo, becoming refugees in an alien world. First to Portugal, where the Inquisition followed in 1497. After undergoing a difficult and frightening journey, the first one in the book, they arrived in Sicily. Finding that the Jewish people who had lived there had been expelled, they pretended to have converted to Catholicism and made a new life for themselves, although after several harsh anti-Semitic incidents. When Mount Etna violently erupted in 1669, nearly 200 years later, the family lost both their home and way of life, having to flee again. Raffaello and his wife Bianca, their daughter Florina, and son Raffaello Jr., who I renamed Giuseppe, did exist, as did Gustav Sturmer, a student from Bavaria who later married Florina. He persuaded them to come to his country to make a new start. My story is based on their lives. I had found it touched me so strongly that I felt I had to turn it into a book. The member of the Blumenfeld family who had sent the documents to my cousin said himself that he felt there was, as he said, an opera here. The second journey began. They had no possessions and almost no money. It took them nearly 3 years of hardship before they arrived in Kredlingen, Bavaria, Gustav's home. During their travels, Raffaello found a Jewish ghetto in Rome. Here he saw the suffering of the Jews who lived there. He was drawn to his ancestors' religion and eventually went back to their faith. And the name Blumenfeld has remained in the family ever since. There is, of course, so much relevance in their story to the plight of refugees in the present day. I would be happy to read you 3 short extracts from this book as well. Is that all right, Daphne? Can I do that?
Carry on. Yes, all right, Marion.
Yes. I'm going to find them. Here we are. And first, a little bit about the eruption of Mount Etna. The lava has by this time reached down to the bottom into the valley and into the village where people lived. Outside, confusion had grown. People were piling carts with food, clothing, even furniture. Fires burnt more fiercely as sparks continued to ignite roofs, window frames, and doors. Flames leapt from house to house. Sulphurous smoke blackened the stone walls, and further fires broke out in barns where hay and straw were stored. Hens ran around outside under the feet of those who were trying to load up their carts. A small boy screamed as a large stone hit him on the side of his head, and he fell into the path of an oncoming cart. where a wheel ran over him. His father ran to him, coughing and crying, but the child lay still and silent. And later on, as he spoke, there was a thunderous crack from inside Mount Etna's crater, and they rushed outside. A huge column of smoke, fire, smoke, and rocks spurted from the volcano's center, and streams of lava were devouring the houses in the village and everything else that lay in their path. People could be seen leaving their homes and abandoning all that could not be piled or tied onto carts. Florina and Gustav ran in from feeding the animals. The fire has reached our fields, and the olive trees are already burning. Everyone came outside and watched in horror as the flames raced through the trees and vines, leaving only blackened stumps. And the little bit just at the end of that chapter, Mount Etna erupted in March of 1669. It was 122 days before the destruction ceased and the mountain became quiet again. The whole area around its slopes lay covered under a heavy film of ash and rubble. Villages were totally destroyed and their occupants gone. Generations of cultivation and husbandry disappeared. Perhaps a little bit from their long and arduous journey and the problems that they had.
Yeah. On the door, the bottom, near the door, the bottom.
The family now continued toward their next destination, Bellinzona. The road skirted round Lake Como. According to their plan, this would cover 110 kilometers and take 5 days. To conserve money, they only stayed at inns for 3 nights, and on the 4th night, decided to sleep in the cart. By the 5th day, they had run out of food, and Sophia was grizzling and showing her fists with hunger. That's Florina's baby. She could not be comforted. I have to do something, Florina said. The next time we pass a farm, I must ask to buy milk. I'll come with you, Bianca said. No, Mama. If I just go with Sophia, they may help me. A kilometre or so further on, they came to a farmhouse at the edge of a forest. Florina got out of the cart, wrapped Sophia tightly in her shawl.
Have a nice evening.
To the door. Follow her, Gustav, suggested Rabello, just in case she needs help, but keep your distance. A woman answered Florina's knock. She peered at the young woman and child, wrapped in the shawl. No Romanes, she said harshly, and tried to shut the door. Florina leant against the door to stop her. We're not Romanes. We're a family travelling to Bavaria. My baby is only 8 months old and is hungry. My own milk has dried and we've run out of food. Will you sell me some milk? Sophia had stopped crying and Florina uncovered the shawl to show the woman her child. She looked at Florina's pale skin and red hair. I will give you a mug of milk. That's all I can spare. Give it to the child to drink quickly before my husband gets back. She brought the milk and watched as Sophia drank it, then retrieved the mug and shut the door in Florina's face. And just one more on the subject of Florina's hair. Because they were so desperate, Florina decides the only way they can get some money is to cut this beautiful long red hair that she had. Florina turned to her mother. Please, Mama, will you cut it for me? We still have the scissors Diana gave us in Milan. Bianca nodded and kissed her daughter, too upset to speak. They moved the mule and cart to a quiet street. Bianca searched for the scissors and took Florina's hair gently into her hands. Gustav, Ravello, and Giuseppe turned away, unable to watch. The burnished red curls fell into Bianca's hands and lay there, still glowing with colour. She cut carefully until Florina's remaining hair lay against her neck just above her shoulders. She gathered the rest gently together and tied it with a piece of straw from the mule's bag. Right, I think that's probably enough. So, I have several copies of both books here and can, if you wish, drop them onto your doorsteps or post them to you. You can order both directly from the publisher, Allied Publishing Press. All 3 are also available on Amazon and Kindle. Finally, I would like to offer a quote from a recently published true story, The Cutout Girl by Dirk van Es. This young girl was given sanctuary in Holland during the Second World War by his grandparents. He only recently discovered this and was able to interview her. You may have perhaps have read it. I felt the quote summed up what we all know. Without families, you don't get stories. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk more if you wish.
Okay, Marion, thank you for that interesting talk across the books. If people have got questions now, if they would like to just put their hands up, we will try and identify you, and then we can unmute you. Okay, Shirley, hold on.
We can't see everybody, Stuart, can we?
No, I know, no. I'm not sure which Shirley this is. I've got 3 Shirleys on.
Can we? You need to unmute everybody, don't you, really?
Okay, all right, I'll unmute.
Thank you.
Hold on.
Oh, it's gone very quiet. Are you all asleep?
No, we're all muted.
Oh, you can unmute yourselves if you want to ask questions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, go on, Shirley.
Very interesting. Could you please repeat the title of your last book?
Yes.
You said it's available on Kindle.
Right. It's Flight of the Faithful.
Flight of the Faithful.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
You can get it on Kindle, can you?
Get it on Kindle from Amazon, yes, as well as the paperback.
Thank you very much.
Could I ask a question, Stuart? Angela Doctors.
Carry on.
Marion, that was so interesting. Thank you very much. I'm hoping to get your book, but I just wanted to ask, sadly, the family ended up in Germany, so were they caught up in the Second World War?
No, this was in 1600s.
I know, but they went, but we do know that families did move on and ended up in the wrong bit of Europe. Did they end up in Germany? And were they still there for the Second World War?
Well, I don't really have any information on that, but I knew my uncle very well. He lived in London. He was actually a famous playwright and a journalist, and he never talked about his earlier descendants from the period of the Second World War. So I'm sorry, I can't give you information on that. But there are many thousands of Grünfelds around in the world now, all over the place. So some of them may well have those kind of stories. Maybe I should do another book.
Yes. Yes. Well, it was very interesting. Thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
For your first book, Marion, you've told us about 2 people. Yes. Did you interview a lot of people for that? Were they all suffragettes or other people as well?
He was the only suffragette. There's lots of things in the book about their lives. I interviewed about 20-25 people, from quite a few from local areas. Victoria, who I interviewed, actually was living in Hastings when I went to see her, and she was very funny. When I got there, I had written a standard questionnaire to ask to get people to talk. And first thing she said to me, "I'm very deaf." So I said, "Well, that's fine, don't worry." And then she said to me, "Don't you dare switch on your recording machine until I tell you." But I'd already turned it on. And she told me some wonderful stories other than the pieces that I used. Obviously, I probably shouldn't tell you. Some of them were extraordinary. Most of them had sad stories to tell. Some of them lived reasonably rural lives during the war. Many of them had been in domestic service, which of course finished during the war because they needed them to take over work in munitions. They became bus conductors, postmen, every available job that the men could no longer do. And their stories are wonderful. A lot of girls went into munitions, which was extremely dangerous. Some of them were killed. They called them the canaries because they used to pack the shells with cordite, and it affected their skins and turned them yellow. And made them very, very ill, and a lot of them died because there were no safety concerns in those days in the same way as there should be now. So there were lovely stories from all of them, and what was so interesting, as I said, you get them to talk and they could just talk forever because I had time to listen to them, you know. And many of them said how when their brothers or fathers or husbands came back from the war, they would never, ever discuss it. What they'd been through was so traumatic that they never wanted to talk about it again.
Marion, how did you identify all these people that you interviewed? How did you get to connect with them?
It started off, and I'm not sure exactly how it happened. I think I must have noticed that, first of all, I went to the British Library in Colindale, as it was then, to get all the stuff from the magazines so that I could think about how I was going to put this book together. And then somehow I heard about a book which had been produced by the BBC called Out of the Doll's House, which was about the same thing, that what these women had done during the war. And I contacted the producer, who was very kind, gave me a list of names, most of whom I followed up. And then I asked around locally. A friend of mine, her nanny had been during that period, and she told me her story. I discovered 3 teachers who were living in a retirement home in Elstree. They all talked to me. It just sort of picked up. These 2 lovely women I told you about, and there are lots more. You've really got to read the book to find out about them all. If I tell you too much, you won't want to buy it.
You're doing a good job selling it to us, Marion. Go on, Marlene.
You mentioned, or I begin to understand, that they changed their religion many times due to whatever they were at the time.
Yes.
And then they returned to Judaism, which caused them further problems.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that at all?
Can I what? Sorry.
Elaborate on that at all?
Yes, because when the original family went to Sicily, they discovered that some years previously all the Jews had been expelled. Jacob felt that Sicily would be a safe place to go because it was further away. But of course it turned out that it wasn't particularly safe. They were badly treated. He was beaten up quite soon after they arrived. They were called dirty Jews. When the 2 little boys went to school, they suffered as well. So that's why they decided to pretend to be Catholics, and eventually they settled into a Catholic family. It's a very long family tree, which I've done, which shows how the family evolved. And of course, when they had to flee, they were in Italy, which was fine. They were still Catholics at that stage. And when Raffaello found the ghetto in Rome, he actually had an epiphany, but kept it very quiet. He didn't want to tell the family because he didn't know how they would cope with that. And it was only many years later when they got to Bavaria, they also at that stage had problems, because not only was it mainly a Protestant country, but it was the time of the Counter-Reformation, so that there were many Catholics there as well. And they couldn't get help when Bianca died because it was a Protestant family. So again, they had to find other ways of dealing with her burial. And all the time, Raffaello felt he needed to change. And eventually he managed to do it. And although his wife, he wouldn't do it until after his wife had died, but eventually he came into contact with a gentleman who, although they swore they were Protestants, there were obvious signs that their family had originally been Catholic, Jewish. And when his son and daughter-in-law got married, they were married in the Protestant church, and then they went across to Salzburg, Salzbach it was called then, because this man told them about his cousin who was a rabbi, and he married them properly again. I gave them a blessing under in the traditional way, and they then brought their children up as Jewish. So it followed back again, and it remained so. Does it make sense? Sorry, I hope it does.
It does. Any other questions?
All the people went through to be Jewish. It's amazing what people still do, and Amazing.
And did any of you have the Sephardi background as far as you knew? Because now, of course, they can get citizenship again if they come forward. They've been given by Spain and they can become citizens again. In fact, I did a trip in Portugal with my husband on a river cruise. And when we were on the river, we were taken by the guide up to a little village on the top of a mountain, way, way up. And we were fascinated to discover that all the houses in one particular street had no windows in the front. The windows were at the back, so that if they wanted to very secretly continue their rituals, they could do so without anybody seeing. There was a ruined ritual bath. Sorry, I can't think of the word for the minute.
Mikvah.
Thank you. And also, at the time of the Inquisition, the people who remained had to become conversos, as I said, but they also changed their names. They made them change their surnames. And this particular girl, her name was Figuera, Fig, but they changed them into vile names, Spanish for pig and dog, and they had to keep those surnames. They were very, very badly treated. So at that time, you know, it was that they had to leave. There were all these auto de fes where they burnt people at the stake. It was absolutely terrible time. And, you know, comes around again and again, doesn't it?
It sure does.
There are 3 people that I know of who have actually read the book, and I'm going to be very naughty, and I'm going to ask Howard and Betty if they would just like to say a little bit about how they found it. I can't seem to see Gloria anywhere. I presume she's listening, but she also has read a copy of the book. I don't know.
So Howard, who is that? Howard
Keane.
Howard Keane.
Okay.
His friend Betty.
I'll unmute him.
Are they there?
Hold on.
Thank you.
Howard, can you unmute yourself? I'm trying.
Has she not heard any of that?
Hello, is that better?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Go on.
Howard, do you mind the question that I asked you? Did you hear it?
I heard the question. You didn't hear my reply.
No, Betty, I didn't.
Start again.
I just wondered, because I know you both read the book, if
Yes.
you'd like, without too much heavy criticism, if you'd like to say or not.
I
I
couldn't
thought you had.
It is the most beautiful page turner, and it stirred me very much, even though it can't be my background because I'm not Sephardi. I don't know too much about my family background, but it's very easy to identify Jews who had such problems in order to stay Jewish. So we passed it around a little bit. Howard has even bought another copy. And I couldn't recommend it enough. I absolutely devoured it, Marion. I have to read it again. It's with my son at the moment, so we're waiting to get it back again. But well done, well done.
What we should really do, Barry, is not lend it around, but tell them to buy it.
Well, exactly.
Howard,
what did you think of it?
Hello?
Howard,
Yes.
I
Move
thought it was
across,
very
Howard,
good.
so we can see you.
I thought it was a very, very good page turn, Marion. I told my daughter about it, who's an avid reader. I bought it for her to read, and she read it in about 3 days, and she's equally enthusiastic.
Good.
I'd like to thank Betty for introducing the book to me.
I have to tell you that my son, who is not a reader, we had one of those Sundays when it just rained all day. He took himself to bed and never moved for 4 hours because he couldn't put it down. Read the whole book in that 4 hours.
yeah, I absolutely identify with that. Yeah, it's very emotional, Marion.
Yes, it is. It is.
So if people are interested, all they need to do is go onto Amazon and look up Flight of the Faithful.
Or I can deliver them. I've got about 10, 12 copies here. I've got 2 or 3 copies of the wartime book as well. If anybody would like to, Daphne, you've got my email address.
Yes, get in touch with me and I'll give you Marion's email address.
Thank you. And then I'm happy to deliver them or post them if that would be too difficult to deliver. As I say, as long as you've got doorsteps, I can get them to you.
Marion,
just as a matter of interest, and I shouldn't really say this, I suppose, but if I sell to you direct, I make the whole price. If you buy them through Amazon, which I'm quite happy for you to do, that take is enormous.
How much is it, as a matter of interest?
The book is £9.99. The Kindle has been reduced to £2.30. Not that I'm trying to put you off, because a lot of people I know prefer to buy on Kindle now, as I do myself, so it's only fair. If you buy it through the publisher, I still only get quite a small amount because the printer and all the rest of it. So please buy from me direct.
Marion, how easy or difficult was it to get the book published? Did you have to sell it around quite a bit?
I didn't this time so much. My first book, Wartime is Your Time, has another story, because when I had finished it as my dissertation, my English tutor contacted Optima, which was one of Robert Maxwell's companies. And they said, yes, they'd love to publish it. Would I do some rewrites, which I did. And then I don't know what happened with Robert Maxwell. He probably didn't like it, so he jumped off the boat. So I got the book back, and I was very, very angry. And I thought, I'm not having this. So my son-in-law, Bradley, Gloria's son, recommended a printer who put it all together for me, and because it had a lot of photographs in it. And the man who had helped me put it together, who was an associate of Alliance Publishing Press, although it had a different name then, helped me to put it together. And I managed to get an interview on the Hendon Finchley Times, an interview on the JC, an interview on a small Jewish radio station then called Spectrum Radio. Yeah. I went down to the Imperial War Museum, and I was very angry because although they were happy to take the cassettes and put them in the archive, they wouldn't buy a book in the bookshop. And I have very good friends, and bless them, they all helped out as well. So I sold all my first publication, and I then reprinted it, and with the money that I got from the first lot, and sold most of those again through the publisher. I went to her, and she said, no, yeah, I'm happy to take it on for you.
So when did you write your first book?
First book, just after I got my degree. It came out about 1991, I think, and then again later on, once I'd sold more.
Have you got another book ready?
No, I think I'm exhausted at the moment because there was so
but
much.
As you said, this could be a book, couldn't it?
The problem arose because when I originally wrote it, it was in 2005. I took it to this publisher at the time, and unfortunately that's when she said she'd like to publish it, but that's when my husband became very ill. So I put it on the back burner and thought about it. I thought, I really need to get this out. So I went back to her, and she said, the problem we have is that in 2005, there was basically no internet, no way of doing Google research in the way there is now. And because it's a historical document, even in fiction, everything has to be 100% accurate. And it took us a year nearly to rewrite, check everything, pull the story together so that it was all absolutely as it should be in the 1600s.
Hard to believe, isn't it? We're talking about it.
So can you just remind us of the name of the other book, please?
Wartime is Your Time.
Wartime is Your Time.
Yes.
Okay.
Marion, I don't know if there's any more questions, but I just want to say thank you very, very much. It was very interesting, and I think everybody enjoyed it. And to hear extra bits as well now, that was fascinating about how hard it is to get things published and all the rest of it. That, you know, it's very interesting. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it.
Really nice
Thank you, man. What an opportunity for all of us sitting at home, you know, something to do. Think about writing a book. And actually, I've heard of people who have now got time to sit down and start writing about their family history, because I know with my grandparents, I know very little about them. There is nobody around that I can ask their history, where they came from. And I feel that's a big gap. And I think I know some people that have extensive family history that they've sat down and written about, and it's so interesting. So there's an opportunity for people now, if you're looking for something to do to fill in the next few months, start writing down your family history, and who knows, it might become a bestseller one day.
I've done some family biographies, which I've basically put away for my kids and grandchildren. Absolutely fascinating, because my mother's family was enormous. Those that were left, unfortunately, like everybody else, we lost a lot of them. But I put that together. I've done a biography of my husband's family, my own family, my mother-in-law's family, and my father-in-law's family.
Wow.
They're all in the cupboard waiting for my kids to throw them on the dustbin.
I know from a personal point of view, my paternal grandparents came from Poland. Yes. And I know nothing about their background, and there is nobody I suppose I could research it. These days, I think you can a little bit, but what a big gap in my life that I don't know anything about them.
Stuart, I managed.
Okay.
We've got to go.
Marion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marion, thank you so much.
Thank you.